Good morning, everyone. Welcome along to the Blood Red Morning Bulletin live on the Blood Red YouTube channel and Liverpool.com Facebook. I'm your host for today, Patrick Smith, and I'm joined by our in-house Liverpool.com Hungarian writer, Ben Bocsak. Ben, we're basically going to spend the whole show today talking about your fellow countryman, Dominik Szoboszlai. I mean, simple one. First question, is Dominik Szoboszlai the signing of the season? I think I know the answer.
I think at this stage, it's got to be. I mean, sure, some other clubs have made some good signings as well. But if we're just looking at Liverpool based on his performances so far, he's definitely the signing of the season for us. Only time will tell whether he can be the signing of the season in the Premier League overall. I think he still needs to do a bit more. I know he's been really impressive, but I think, he needs to have probably more moments like that one against Leicester last night. Obviously, just because I know he can do that, and he's got the ability to contribute with more goals and assists. So I'm expecting still more from him. But yeah, based on what we've seen so far, certainly for Liverpool, he's the signing of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the first of many strikes I think we'll see like that. Even me just seeing a few highlights in the Bundesliga, some of the goals he scored for Leipzig got absolutely crazy. I'm sure you'll be able to tell our listeners way more about that, Ben, because you've been, touting him to be signed for Liverpool for years. So, how often can we expect this to happen from Szoboszlai? Because the ball striking alone I want to focus on. It's kind of the last time I saw someone hit a ball like that was Steven Gerrard, if we're being totally honest.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you get a lot more space in the Bundesliga to take shots on like that. But I think Szoboszlai did an interview while he was still at Leipzig where his teammates he said his teammates are always telling him to just shoot because he's got such a good ability. And he said sometimes maybe it was a bit unselfish when he was asked about his sort of weakness because he doesn't shoot enough. So certainly at Liverpool, I think we've seen the opposite of that. He's taken on a lot of shots, sometimes from pretty much impossible angles. But I think there's no impossible angle when it comes to his sort of striking range. I'm expecting a lot more. I think obviously as sort of Liverpool's midfield solidifies a little bit more and games become maybe a tad bit easier. I mean, Liverpool have been winning comfortably, but we've also been conceding goals first quite a lot. I think Szoboszlai even alluded to that in his post-match interview. He said it's always been like this since he arrived at the club when he was asked about what it was like to play with a goal behind. So yeah, I think he needs to get in those sort of positions more. It's a bit tougher to find that space in the Premier League.
Yeah.
But I think over time, he'll probably comfortably get to around 10 goals at least this season. I mean, he's already got 2. I think it's not far-fetched to say he can get 10 at least and, a few assists as well here and there.
Yeah, it's exactly the point because it's kind of harsh to compare, long shots in the Premier League now to long shots in the noughties because back then no one knew what a gegenpress was, let alone teams playing, high blocks. Everyone would play a low block. There'd be loads of space in midfield for Gerrard to basically roll the ball up his feet and ping it in the top corner for 30 yards. Whereas that's so hard, as you say. That's almost more impressive from Szoboszlai because he finds those tight spaces and can still get those shots. So, I mean, even the one Leicester yesterday, he was being closed down and still absolutely rifled it into the top corner. But I think the main thing that's impressed Liverpool fans, Ben, and actually fans of football in general, is Neil Jones made a very good point on Monday's Blood Red podcast. If you were doing your lazy scouting of Szoboszlai, he said, you would think he's a bit of a luxury player, not a centre midfielder who could play box to box. Because to be honest, when Liverpool signed him, I was one of those expected to be this sort of number 10. He'd played on the wing a couple of times, a bit of a luxury player, not exactly someone who's physical, but he really is someone who works first, absolutely grafts, and is arguably one of the best defensive additions Liverpool have made in quite a long time.
Yeah, it's the Red Bull DNA, I think. He certainly wasn't always like that. I think he's grown a lot physically and defensively in the last few years, and you have to do that when you're playing for the likes of Salzburg and the likes of Leipzig, who plays very similar style to Liverpool, and on top of that, I think as well, he's always wanted to become a key player in the Hungarian national team, and obviously the Hungarian national team isn't the strongest when it comes to in terms of the quality of the players. So to stand out there, he really needed to work on his defensive skills. And I spoke to the Hungarian national team manager about that and how he's improved quite a lot in the defensive side of things since he's took over. I think Marco Rossi took over in 2018 or 19.
He's even played him as a six, Ben, hasn't he? To interrupt, that's just a testament to how well he's played defensively.
Yeah, exactly. He's played in a six against Italy, which is a difficult sort of opponent, and Marco Rossi seems to believe that that's a position he could play in the future, which is interesting. He kind of compared him to Andrea Pirlo. I know Neil Jones said he kind of reminds him of Xabi Alonso in the Blood Red podcast. So those are interesting comparisons, but I think that's the good thing about Dominik. It's just like he's got so much confidence and so much sort of tactical intelligence that he can kind of be like anything that he wants to be.
Yeah.
And
he's just got absolutely everything, isn't he, Ben?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the exciting part. I think we've only scratched the surface really of what he can do in a Liverpool shirt. Back in Hungary, people are still expecting a lot more from him. So I think that goes to show how, the sort of contrasting opinions back in my country, and then reading the comments from Liverpool fans who are already so excited, but back in Hungary, people are like, no, we want to see him score more goals. I think he can do a lot more. And I think I kind of have to agree. I think there's still so much more to come from him. He's only 22 years old. I think he's going to be turning 23 now in the next couple of weeks, but he's still very young, and he's got a big future ahead of him and a lot of potential.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely crazy to say that people are expecting more of him. We're only a month into the season. We don't want to get too ahead of ourselves. A few of the comments alluding to that as well. But wow, I mean, what a player Liverpool have on their hands. I think he really could be the signing of the season. In the same window when Liverpool got Alexis McAllister for only 35 million, he's been fantastic, by the way. It just shows how much of an impact Szoboszlai has had. But I wanted to ask you, Ben, about another midfielder, going back to Liverpool's 3-1 win last night. It's the second match we've seen Wataru Endo starting and basically play the entire 90. And how do you think he got on last night? Because there's been a few criticisms of him, mainly after the Europa League performance, but he played pretty well last night, didn't he?
Yeah, I thought he was good. I was never really worried about that Europa League performance. I think you got to understand, like, he's coming from playing in the Japanese national team in Stuttgart, who are fighting for relegation. So he's coming from very defensive systems where obviously the job of a holding midfielder is a little bit easier. Whereas when you go to Liverpool, sometimes as a holding midfielder, you kind of have to, you're kind of left isolated and have to thwart transitions on your own, which is a lot more difficult. But I think I actually went to Japan in the last few weeks, and I've got Wataru Endo's book with me, and through the use of Google Translate, there's an application where you can take a picture on your phone and it translates everything. I've been reading his book slowly but surely, and I think the impression that I get of him is he's someone who's a really intelligent football brain. The way he thinks about football is really smart, and he has some sort of very unique ideas, and that I haven't read before. It's actually a very fresh book to read in that regard, in terms of how he talks about, the process of developing as a player, making mistakes, and how important that is. And I also watched an interview with him after the last game. He was talking in Japan. He has a video blog there, and then he was talking about, sort of acknowledging that, he's not quite there yet. He needs a bit more time to adjust, but he says he'll get there. He's very confident in his ability. And I think really in the second half, we saw what he can be for Liverpool, and Jurgen Klopp made a comment after the game about it as well. I thought he was brilliant in the second half. The way he won a lot of balls, made a lot of recoveries, and controlled the game. And I think, I think maybe people will roll their eyes at the fact that he got an assist for Szoboszlai's goal, because Szoboszlai's goal was so impressive. But I think that pass is actually really underrated. If you look at the way he sort of found him in that space, kind of beat Leicester's midfield line to get Szoboszlai in behind their midfielders. I think that was quite a smart pass and a bit underrated. And I think he deserves a bit more credit for that, perhaps. Obviously, I mean, Szoboszlai still had a lot to do, but I think it was a very smart pass from him. And just in general, I really like the way he sort of improved from his first half performance and grew into the game. And I think there's a lot more to come from him as well. I think he's going to be a key player for Liverpool. Maybe not the starter that everyone wanted in that holding midfield position, but I certainly think he can become a sort of James Milner type player, a very utility and useful midfielder.
Yeah, no doubt a great addition for Liverpool. You put it on a plate for Szoboszlai, Ben, didn't you? Let's be honest. But I mean, it's just interesting you mentioned that because people may say that tongue-in-cheek comment about him getting an assist, but I can't remember the stat, but I believe the goals and assists the Liverpool midfielders got last night was the same total as the midfield for the entirety of last season, the same as Fabinho, Henderson and Milner, I believe, for last season. I might be wrong. But I wanted to ask you as well about the other midfielder, Ryan Gravenberch. He got himself a couple of assists. Pretty solid performance from him too, Ben. There's a very, very tidy player in there, and let's just hope Jurgen Klopp can bring it out.
Yeah, I thought his 2 performances so far have been really exciting. I mean, obviously the opposition perhaps wasn't the greatest, but I've enjoyed what I've seen. I think he's very physical. That run he made for that goal for Gerdie Gakpo. I mean, again, Gakpo had a lot to do to finish that chance, but it was a really impressive run from Gravenberch, and I think overall his energy is really exciting, and that's kind of what Liverpool have lacked in the midfield in the last couple of years, really. But at the same time, technically, he's really good as well, and he's got a smart footballing brain. I think it goes to show that in the last 2 games that he started, he's created the most chances in both games while he was on the pitch. So I think a lot of people may have expected him to be a holding midfielder for Liverpool when he was signed, just because that's kind of what the messaging was around him. But I'm seeing him more as a sort of competition for Curtis Jones and Dominik Szoboszlai, and I think if we're talking about Liverpool's midfield depth now, it's really exciting to have someone of Gravenberch's quality being essentially a backup.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And I mean, as you say there, from Ajax, his main credentials as well. He was a great midfielder going forward, scored goals, great on the ball, great passer of the ball, not necessarily defensively proficient, even though he stands at, I believe, 6'2" or 6'3" or something. He's absolutely massive, isn't he? But no doubt Jurgen Klopp can turn him into a more defensive-minded player. And as you say, it takes midfielders a long time to settle into any club, let alone Liverpool and that gegenpressing side. It's so hard to settle inside the field, particularly to be fair to Wataru Endo. It's even harder as a 6, as you were touching on before. So yeah, plenty of time for these new midfielders to settle in and, grow as Liverpool players. But it's really exciting times, and it's really good signs, actually, that the Liverpool midfield rebuild has sort of worked so far. I don't want to get ahead of myself. We're only a month in, of course, but the way things are going, they have rebuilt that midfield. Box tick, that's what they need to do. And hopefully now they can fight on all fronts and maybe even fight for a Premier League title. But yeah, long way to go, as we said. But thank you so much to everyone for joining us here on the Blood Red channel and Liverpool.com. Plenty of content going up on Liverpool.com from our brilliant writers like Ben ahead of Liverpool's clash with Tottenham on Saturday. That's a massive one now in the Premier League, isn't it? And of course, plenty of build-up for you right here on the Blood Red channel. We've got Analysing Anfield going up later today with Josh Williams and Mo Stewart. And then, of course, the Blood Red podcast on Friday. But yeah, thank you so much for joining me, Patrick Smith and Ben Bocsak. We'll catch you again soon on the Blood Red Morning Bulletin.